Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever felt you're aging too quickly or getting cold after cold or immune system just isn't what it used to be or how you think it can be, then do we have the anti-aging health boosting show for you. Today we'll be talking with New York Times best-selling author and longevity expert Dr. Mark Leponis, co-author of Ultra Prevention and best-selling author of The Hunter Farmer Diet Solution and Ultra Longevity. Today I want to talk with him about ultra longevity and ultra health, how boosting our immune system can help us live longer, healthier, and more energized lives. That plus we'll talk about the power of dance, developing a dream mantra, the power of music therapy, and why we all need our vitamin L. Love that is. Well, welcome to the show, Dr. Leponis. Are you ready to shine?
I'm ready, Michael.
Woohoo! Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Before we dive right into things, I've got to ask, is Hook still one of your all-time favorite movies?
It still is. That's one you can watch over and over again. You know, it's interesting you picked that up in that book, but you'll find so many pearls that are hidden in there, and they just keep coming up like little buried treasures. They're so fantastic. The little cameo appearances, the little, 13-word, beautiful sayings. I mean, it's just a fantastic movie. Love it.
And it has a beautiful message about staying young.
It does. That's right. You're as young as you think.
I love it. So if we back up in your life, get into a time machine a little bit, what first got you interested in holistic medicine?
It's hard to say when or what. I think some people are always geared that way. When I was thinking about a career, what would I do with my life? I was thinking health and medicine and helping people, but I didn't want to be like all the other doctors that I knew. And that was, perhaps too scientific, too allopathic, not enough feelings or caring, perhaps.
And then before you ended up at Canyon Ranch in Massachusetts, and I would hear about that, you ended up in Montana. What was that like?
Well, I loved Montana because it's beautiful, big sky country. You'll never go to a place that's more scenic, and it's just spectacular views. The living is easy, and the people are friendly. It's really quite a nice place to visit or live.
Beautiful. And then how did you end up at Canyon Ranch in Massachusetts, and what is Canyon Ranch?
Well, Canyon Ranch is the country's best health resort, and we're not just in Lenox, Mass. We started in Tucson, Arizona about 35 years ago, so we've been around for quite a while. Lenox has been around over 25 years, and we have other locations as well. In fact, we're putting one up in Turkey this year that will be opening in July. But it's a health resort, a place where you can come to spend a week on vacation and make sure it's a healthy vacation. You can eat right and exercise and relieve stress and get your body worked on and go home feeling younger and healthier than you arrived.
So it's like getting a tune-up.
It's like getting a tune-up. And people also come to learn. I mean, they learn how to cook and how to shop and how to eat better and how they might reduce stress and how they could do better with their health. Because, when it comes to prevention, I guess everybody's got a little different story, and that is the focus should be a little different for each person.
That makes sense. So looking at that and how you got into this, when did you start latching on to the idea of longevity? And it's a really different, it's not the allopathic approach to be looking at how we help people live longer. Instead, we're typically treating a disease.
I think it's come from a variety of things, but one thing has been a lot of the international volunteer work that I've done with my wife. My wife and I every year try to take a trip somewhere and go volunteer in a place where they don't have much health care. And I learned by doing that, and the place we've been going the last 5 or 6 years is in Southeast Asia, in Laos. And in northern Laos, they have very few doctors, very little health care, not a lot of prevention. And we learned how fortunate we are in this country because we, don't have to deal so much with survival. We've got enough food, we've got enough water, we've got basic health care, we've got, vaccines and emergency care, we've got surgery if we need it. Of course, these are things they don't have in Laos. And so I've learned that we've got such great health care in this country, relatively speaking, that we have the luxury of being able to focus on longevity as opposed to survival. In places like Laos, you're just trying to survive. here in this country, we have the luxury of being able to focus on living longer.
It's kind of, do we have here, would you say, there was a term recently I heard, affluenza.
It's not really that so much, but you hear a lot of people complaining about the healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And I feel bad about that because we have the best healthcare system in the world by far. It's not the most inexpensive, but I can tell you it's the best. And people, lose perspective. And when you go to a place like Laos and you see how those people try to live and survive, mm-hmm. you get a new perspective on the American healthcare system. And yes, it could be better in terms of, sometimes less is more and the expense is so much. But the quality is so far beyond what you can get anywhere else. It's important to remember that.
Beautiful. So let's go from there. I loved in your book, you have a very different take, which really resonates on a very core level about where aging comes from and what is in many ways the most important component to look at. So I'm wondering if you can talk with us about the new science of the immune system and take us briefly through what I would call the immune system 101.
Sure. Well, let me just preface it by giving a little more background. And again, Please. When traveling and doing this international work, it really does put perspective on things. For example, in Laos, it's a much shorter life expectancy. Poor people have a life expectancy in the mid-60s as opposed to the U.S., where it's now approaching 80. Mm-hmm. And so we're getting about 15 years of extra average life than the people in Laos. And what we've learned there is people are predominantly succumbing to infections. They have things like pneumonia, they have bad bone infections, they have soft tissue infections, they deal with things like tuberculosis, parasites, all the different types of, digestive parasites that tend to live, very, very well in Laos. And that's the main problem there in Laos. Here in the U.S., that's not our main problem anymore. It used to be. But that was before the days of good hygiene, clean water, clean food, being able to get rid of the parasites in our food supply, having antibiotics, vaccines, surgical interventions for things like appendicitis, diverticulitis, gallbladder infections. So we're not dying from the infections here like the people do in Laos. And what's interesting is our immune system, which is really designed to protect us from those infections. That's how it cut its teeth. The immune system evolved learning to protect us from infections. Mm-hmm. Today in the U.S., that means that the immune system doesn't have the proper focus for us because we're not dying from infections. We're dying from cancer, and we're dying from the things like cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke. And what we've learned is our immune system, in trying to protect us perhaps from these infections, might be overprotecting. And that overprotection leads to more cardiovascular disease, more diabetes, more strokes, more cancer. And that's what we're dealing with here in the U.S. And that's because we've evolved beyond the place in medicine where infections are the primary problem.
So in a sense, and I've heard you talk in other interviews about give and take. If one thing helps in one area, it may take away in another. When it comes to our immune system, are you saying it's too strong, or that it doesn't know where to, and I would assume it's not, but it doesn't know where to put its efforts?
It maybe has some limited tools that are most effective for things like infection and for injuries. Those tools don't translate well into cardiovascular disease and cancer. Mm-hmm. And so we need our immune system to, be, let's say, to redesign itself to help us against those two chief problems that we're dealing with. Because for people over the age of 45 in the U.S., 3/4 will die from either a heart attack or from cancer. And that's a huge number. Those are the two things that we really have to deal with the most in this country, whereas in Laos, again, and in developing nations, it's more infections. So that's what our immune system is designed to handle. It's evolved on that. It's been thousands and thousands of years of having to deal with these infections. And now, the last 100 years, we're in a place where that's not the primary problem anymore. And we need our immune system to learn some new tricks, let's say.
How do we start to strengthen? And I would assume one of the things that was very cool that you talked about, I never really thought about before, was the innate intelligence of the immune system and how much it has to remember since birth and even pre-birth of what mama got exposed to for what baby and now us, what we are, our system has to remember all the way till now what it's been exposed to.
That's what's amazing, is what a great job our immune system does at recognizing, things in our environment that could be harmful. In fact, as you say, it doesn't even take exposure for our immune system to be able to protect us from a large majority of microbes and germs. We have this so-called innate immunity, and that is we're born without any training of the immune system at all, with the ability to fend off a number of different microbes, germs, bacteria, viruses, also parasites. So we come with that part of the instruction manual already installed. And then there's a learning process that usually takes place in the first few years of life, where as we get exposed to new microbes, our immune system learns how to deal with them as well. And so by the age of 20, most of us have immunity to 95% or more of all the microbes that we come into contact with during our lives.
I think you even mentioned that, and I'm going to get the name wrong. I want to call it thorax. It's not thorax, but there's a part. It may be where the T cells go, or one of the other cells goes for continuing education that gets really small as we get older in life.
You're thinking of the thymus. It's
thymus,
a gland
yes.
in the upper chest, and in a baby, the thymus is about this big, and in adults, you can barely find it. And by the time someone's in their 60s, there's no more thymus left, and that is part of the training ground for our immune system. It's part of the immune system's, as you mentioned, their training center.
So how do we start to go to the? Well, first off, I guess we need to make the connection: longevity, aging, immune system. How does having a stronger immune system really help us live happy, healthier, longer, in addition to preventing colds and things like that?
I guess it's partly semantics, because, when you say stronger, I think of it as being, perhaps in balance, and that is like Goldilocks, not too strong, but, strong enough, it's just right where the immune
system. Give me that porridge.
Yeah, exactly. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right. Same thing with the immune system. That is, we want it to give us immunity against the infections, the things that we would be exposed to, but we also don't want it to be overpowered and start to attack us, which is typically what happens later in life. And these are where the autoimmune diseases come into play. We want an immune system that can protect us, give us immunity, but not attack us. And it turns out that's kind of a fine line. In other words, to give the immune system enough to do, but don't let it get bored where it starts to attack us. And, that's more difficult.
I come from a barefoot running background, and when I hear "don't get it too bored," I hear "give it some dirt."
Yeah, some dirt is a good way to keep it busy. You're right, and it's interesting you say that, because the more dirt we're exposed to, the healthier our immune system seems to function. Mm-hmm. And it's the lack of exposure to dirt growing up that seems to lead to more things like allergies and more autoimmune diseases. In Laos, it's interesting. There's a lot of dirt, and there's not that much soap, or other cleansers, and so the kids grow up very dirty. And as adults, they don't seem to have much in the way of autoimmune disease that seems to protect them. In the last 5 or 6 years of being in Laos, I can only remember a couple bona fide autoimmune diseases that I saw. Otherwise, mainly infectious diseases.
I would guess allergies way down too. Does that sound
way
right?
Down because of the dirt exposure, yeah. And so it's a paradox, really, where the dirt exposure you would think would get us more prone to infection. Actually, it's the opposite. It gives your immune system the knowledge that it needs, the information to create immunity.
So I guess you could say to parents out there that if your kids are playing in the dirt, relax. It's okay. It's good for them.
That's mostly true. Of course, the parents always then ask me, well, is it good dirt? And I don't always know. Sometimes it's hard to know where you find the good dirt, But
classic. So let's go from there, and let's talk about what we can do to either strengthen our immune system, or maybe even the right term is start to put our immune system back in school, get it smarter.
Yeah, sure. Rebalance, perhaps, or you could say control the immune system, which is really where I think it needs to go, because What we've learned is, if you just think of the immune system as it's the way that our body interacts with the outside world. And so anything that's stressful, any interaction with the outside world that's stressful, will get our immune system responding in a way that's not necessarily healthful. So, for example, that could be an infection that we get exposed to in the environment. It could be an injury in the environment. It could be something noisy. It could be something glaring. It could be something that makes us anxious or scared. It might be something that gets us so worried we start to run away. It might be an accident. All of those things would be triggers for the immune system to respond. And the way that it responds is by causing inflammation.
Let me pause you for one brief sec. I want to come to this inflammation, but I want to reiterate and make sure I hear this clearly. It's from what I understand as well is people may not make this translation is stress equals immune system response. Stress on the system, fear and anxiety, something that makes us uncomfortable is actually literally doing something physiological or biological to our system.
Yeah, because remember, the immune system's our defense system, and if we're nervous, if we're scared because we're about to get in trouble or be injured, our immune system, it just smells that fear and starts to get ready to respond to this, crisis that might be coming. And so it's very preemptive. It's trying to second guess what's going on and understand if it's about to be stressed because it wants to be proactive. It wants to gear up. So the immune system's, very smart that way. And that is, if it senses a problem coming, it starts to get ready to respond.
This makes me also think back to college days and people who experience this at any point in life. But college, I went to Colorado College, Colorado Springs. You had one course for 3.5 weeks, just one class at a time, full on 100% effort. And then you had 4.5 days to recover after each class. And so most people would make it through the 3.5 weeks without getting sick. And as soon as that day came for them to recover, people are knocked out with cold, flu, and you name it, because the immune system has a chance to dial down or just it's completely overwhelmed by that point.
No, I think you're right, and that is those periods of stress, and when the stress goes away, can make us more susceptible to getting an infection. Sure.
So going back to immune system, what you were saying before, I had briefly stopped you when you were starting to talk about stress equals immune system response equals inflammation.
Yeah. But it wouldn't just necessarily be emotional stress. It could be a physical stress. It could be an infection. It could be an injury. It could be a body process. It could be perhaps some exposure to a toxic compound. All of these things would be creating stress for the individual. We've seen it even when people don't sleep well. You might have heard of this condition called sleep apnea that causes a blockage in the airway while someone's asleep at night. And that's another form of stress. I mean, not breathing, it's very stressful. And we know that creates the inflammation from the immune system as well. So anything that's a stressful process to the body will trigger inflammation, yes.
So maybe we should talk about some of these K categories. And I like that you started with breath. And I'm a huge fan of, for instance, the Buteyko method. And as I'm here talking with you, to make sure that I kind of stay in my Zen zone, I go back to the breath, take it down to the diaphragm, take it nice and slow. How can the breath make a change or improve our immune system?
Well, breath is interesting because it's the only automatic function of the body that we can also control. And, what people don't realize is their breath is affected by their thinking, and vice versa. How you breathe affects your thinking, and how you think affects your breathing. An example would be, if you're worried, if you're, about to take that exam in class and you go into the exam room, you're probably breathing differently. You're probably breathing more quickly. It's probably more shallow breaths. Your diaphragm is probably not descending as far into the belly. Your belly muscles are probably tighter. And that's because those are all features of being under more stress. And the breathing is changed as a result of being under that stress. And the result of the breathing change is to also create some stress. And so that can be a vicious cycle. It's part of the vicious cycle that can turn into a condition called hyperventilation.
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful. If you've ever had it before, I've had it myself, and it's interesting because you feel short of breath, and you're breathing much, much too quickly, much faster than you would need to. And yet you might just be sitting in a chair and you start to feel terrible. Your hands become numb and you feel more and more short of breath and you feel lightheaded and you feel faint. You might even want to feel like you might have to sit down. You might keel over. That's hyperventilation. We see it all the time, people that are under stress. And this vicious cycle of the breathing affecting the thinking and the thinking affecting the breathing gets people in this state that they can't get out of. The old trick, is breathe in the paper bag, of course, and that is we have people that take a paper bag and they just hold it over their mouth and nose, and they just slowly breathe into the bag, and that causes you to rebreathe the carbon dioxide, and that helps slow down the hyperventilation. It's powerful, though. If you've ever had it, it is a very, very powerful physiologic feeling.
I think for some people who don't even think in terms of hyperventilation, panic attack.
That's exactly a panic attack, sure. If you get in that panicky feeling, your breathing is going to aggravate that panicky sensation, and it becomes a panic attack that's hard to control.
So how do we flip breath on its head? And I'm kind of leading the witness because I'm going sympathetic, parasympathetic. We got to switch it from one to the other.
Yeah, so the reverse is also true, and that is if we can control our breathing, that can control the thought process and the level of stress. So the easiest way to do that, if someone gets into the panic stage, is with the brown paper bag. But that same idea, that same concept can be used even if we're just feeling anxious. Mm-hmm. And that is to slow down the breathing and especially take longer with the breath out. Because what happens is with people, trying to, under pressure, they're nervous, they're anxious, their breathing is sped up, and they just want to take a breath, and they don't ever let that breath fully out. And of course, that's the best way to slow down the rate of breathing. And so what I have people do is to count. They might, for example, count in to 3, but count out to 9. So they're getting, 3 times longer on the breath out as they are on the breath in, and that will slow down the rate of breathing. And you'll notice that has this calming effect on your thought process as well.
Beautiful. Can you tell us, it seems to be either it's all the rage these days or it isn't, and I'm just way too over the top excited about it, heart rate variability in the breath?
Well, that's another good question. Heart rate variability, which is a measurement that with a special machine you can make, that is a function of stress. Mm-hmm. The more stress we're under, the less our heart rate variability. And it's something that with a accurate EKG you can measure. And there's a machine you can connect yourself to, and it actually measures your level of stress moment by moment by measuring the level of variation in your heart rate. What we've learned, Michael, is that variation in heart rate is largely triggered by the breathing. In other words, a slow breathing triggers a nice, slow variability in the heart rate that's consistent with more relaxation. What's interesting is, again, this give and take, this back and forth. The breathing affects the heart rate variability, and so stress affects the breathing and vice versa. Now we know that breathing is one of the best ways, or concentrating on the breathing is one of the best ways to improve this heart rate variability.
Beautiful. Here's a strange one. You have a whole list in your books: physical exercise, breathing against resistance, swimming, respirate. But I want to know about this one, the sigh.
The sigh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people sigh subconsciously. You might be aware of a sigh after. Not too many people say, I think I'll sigh. Yeah, but it feels good sometimes to do that, and what you're doing besides inflating the lungs a little bit, you're slowing down the breathing, with the sigh. That bigger breath and that longer release is the sigh, and that's exactly what someone's doing. They're relieving the stress by extending the breath, and especially the breath out. So when you're sighing, you probably might, say, I just sighed. That was maybe an indicator that I might be under more stress than I was aware of.
Do you recommend singing or playing a wind instrument for people? Like give them a
I
prescription.
think they're both great for breath work. One that's especially good, I don't know if you could play a woodwind instrument. If you're doing the flute, the trumpet, the sax, the clarinet, those all require quite a bit of breath work, which I think is worth doing. Another one that people have tried are these Australian Aboriginal instruments.
The didgeridoo. Yeah. Thank you.
Didgeridoo. It's like a long tube. That's the didgeridoo. Well, it takes a lot of breath and cheek control to play the didgeridoo. And some people, it's normally you breathe out to play it. But with practice, you can do this circular breathing that you take in take an air into the cheeks, and then you breathe it out with some pressure. And so people can actually get a continuous sound out of the didgeridoo with practice. It's great for practicing the breathing, yeah. And it sounds crazy, the didgeridoo sound.
I got to ask Jessica, my wife, can we get a didgeridoo in here?
Should. They're fun. And some of them are just beautiful when you look at them. They're handmade. They're gorgeous.
They are. So let's go from there. Let's talk about food as thy medicine a little bit, and how we can use food to bolster or get our immune system into balance.
Well, there's a lot of things where food can affect the immune system. The first one is trying not to overdo it. Overeating puts strain on the immune system, mainly because the gut, which is, where digestion occurs, also houses about half of our immune system. And that's simple because, we eat germs when we eat food, and our immune system has to recognize that and be able to protect us just in case we had some contaminated food, etc. And so food affects immunity because of the huge amount of the immune system that resides in the gut. And the first thing is just the quantity of food. I try to encourage people to be more cognizant of how much they're eating first, because in terms of diet, the most important part of that to get right first is the quantity. And that's where a lot of people are missing the boat, because they're overdoing it on the quantity. And so the first thing is we realize that too much food is in itself a stress for the immune system. And so not overeating is a big one.
It's fascinating. I've heard many centurions, people over 100.
Centenarians, yeah.
Centenarians, thank you. And I'm picturing, in fact, this one gentleman from India who's he's got the world record for the marathon over 100. And he didn't start running, I think, till his mid-80s. And his number one secret is don't eat too much.
Yeah, sure. That's not just for marathoning. That's also just for getting to be 100. It's a good tip, a lot of us can get to be 85, eating kind of what we want and help, allowing medicine to fill in the gaps with something to control our blood pressure or cholesterol or diabetes. But to get to be 100, no, there's where you do actually have to eat less. I think it's very hard to get to be 100 with too much weight. Most of the people that you see at 100, they're pretty tiny.
Do you recommend, I know you did in your early books, I'm not sure you're still doing it now, that everybody eats less but more frequently?
It depends, I think, on person's, appetite. Some kind of appetites require grazing. Others just aren't that strong, and those people could eat less often. But I think it's more important to understand the energy balance. And with aging especially, one that goes by people is the need to reduce our food intake every year. As we get older, every 10 years, we need to be eating about 100 calories less per day, which means that after 20 years, that's 200 calories a day less per day. So that means now at 58, I need to be eating 200 calories a day less than I ate at 38. I can still remember 38. It wasn't that long ago. I can remember what the plate used to look like, and now it's 200 calories a day less. If it still looked like it did at 38, I'd be gaining 20 pounds a year.
Wow. Now, is that at the same, has your body become more
older,
efficient?
No, older.
No. I'm gonna put it in terms of positives here. Maybe there's more wisdom in the body. It knows how to use the energy more effectively. Or is it that we all slow down a little bit? We're not quite as active.
we're slowing down. Our metabolism is slowing, and we've lost a little muscle mass with aging, and that's not a bad thing actually, because the slower our metabolism, the
Hmm.
longer we should live. A lot of people are probably doing the wrong thing by trying to speed up their metabolism and so-called boost their metabolism.
Hmm.
But that shortens their life. They shouldn't be doing that, because the faster one's metabolism, the faster you burn out the parts and the shorter the lifespan. And it really doesn't matter how you speed up the metabolism. It could be with more muscle mass, it could be through more exercise, it might be through, some people take thyroid medicines, it might be boosting the metabolism that way. It doesn't matter. All of those shorten life, because while they do make it so you can perhaps eat more calories, the extra calories shorten life, because we're trying to eat fewer calories. And maybe that's the protective mechanism. As we get older, our appetite goes down to get us to eat fewer calories so that we'll live longer.
That makes some sense. Now, what
Yeah.
about, though, exercise? And we might as well go there. So specifically, things like weightlifting to help maintain the muscles, to help maintain the bones. Not so much if we look at it out of the context of calories, but just from a health boost.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about exercise that we're learning, a couple things. One, we don't have to overdose on exercise. People that are heavy duty exercisers, like you've been with marathoning, et cetera, they can cause some damage. The marathon race, you probably know, was a story from ancient Greece where somebody ran, I forget, from Sparta to Thermopylae or something, and with a message, and when they arrived, they relayed the message and killed them dead, because they learned that 26.1, that's the lethal dose of exercise. And those sorts of extreme exercise are stressful for the body, and we know they cause inflammation. Whereas maybe a quarter marathon, yeah, not so much. That's okay. It's not that stressful. And so the dose of exercise is one thing we're learning about, and that is a moderate dose is probably better than a high dose.
Yeah, and one of the things before we started the show, we had a mindful running training program we made for people, because I coached running for years, and my whole goal was to get people to run whatever distance they want, but by keeping them in the parasympathetic zone. So nasal breathing, becoming more aware of the body, more aware of the breath, so that we're not generating the cortisol response, which is knocking you down afterwards. So from there, let's talk a little bit more about some immune-friendly foods.
Yeah. All right. So the first thing was trying to get the calories, the amount right. The next thing is trying to get fish into the diet,
Mm-hmm.
and fish. A lot of people know that they should be eating fish. I'd say there's probably a lot of people that aren't eating enough. The current feelings about fish are that we should getting it at least twice a week in our diet. Probably not more than 5 times, because you need variety in the diet, but at least twice a week seems to reduce the risk of cardiovascular death and helps to control the immune system. The best fish to try to get would be the smaller fish. The smaller the fish, the lower on the food chain. And that means the safer the fish, the cleaner the fish, and the fewer contaminants it will have. And so I think about fish like trout or like salmon or char or mackerel or perhaps herring or sardines, because those smaller fish are lower on the food chain, meaning they're going to be fewer contaminants and healthier in general.
That makes sense. A lot less metals, for instance.
A lot fewer metals, but also the part that's the contaminants that are in the fat of the fish, like the PCBs, the dioxins, the pesticides, those really reside in the fat of the fish. And so the smaller fish will have fewer of the contaminants. I try to get either salmon or trout, or we'll get sushi mackerel, or we'll get sardines, once or twice a week, which is sort of the target.
For people who are vegans or vegetarians, are you looking at an algae, or what do you recommend for them?
You could get an algae, because algae does have the so-called fish oils, which are actually come from algae, the EPA and DHA, which are the omega-3 fish oils. And if someone is vegan and they don't eat fish, I understand they could get that from algae, and there are now some very good algae forms of purified DHA, which I think the average, you should shoot for about 400 milligrams of DHA a couple times a week. and you can get that from algae. I think that's a good choice.
Fantastic. What are a few other immune-friendly foods?
The other ones are high fiber foods that are low in fat and low in sugar. That's really what are the key for the immune system. Remember, half of the immune system resides in the gut, and we want the gut to, at least the immune system, to have an easy job. And what makes the immune system's job easier in the gut is when people eat foods higher in fiber. And there are two types of dietary fiber. They're known as soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, meaning they dissolve in water or they don't. And the two best food sources of soluble and insoluble fiber would be the beans and the berries. And so
Awesome.
those are my two favorite immune-soothing foods because they're high in fiber and they're low in fat and low in sugar. So you could eat a lot of them. And so I like all the beans, like lentils and split peas and green beans and chili bean, black bean, soybean, garbanzo bean, green bean. All of those would be great ways to get more fiber along with fewer calories.
Fantastic, and it sounds just like what Jessica makes for me. So
Great
that
food.
that and
That
then
should be the staple. Beans should be the staple.
we have blueberry and blueberry kale and spirulina and some more good stuff in our smoothie each morning as well.
Blueberry, strawberry, raspberry, blackberry, they're all excellent ways to get fiber. I usually tell people a cup of beans a day, and you'll have to work your way up there. It brings about 12 to 15 grams of fiber depending on the bean. A cup of berries brings another 12 to 15. That's gotten you to 25 grams a day. There's almost your full goals for the day in just two foods. Fantastic.
And I'm gonna back you up on, well, it was what a strange term to use. The building up to a cup of beans a day. Nobody explained this to me for the longest time, and now I get it. Because
Yeah,
I would
don't
eat.
start with a cup. Start with a quarter cup.
Well, if you eat the cup of beans, not only are you going to fart everybody out of the office, but you're going to go, beans don't work for me. I shouldn't do beans.
That's right. So smart. You've got to start slowly to get your body accustomed to them. And what you're doing is you're growing the crop of friendly bacteria that digest the beans. If you start off with too many, you don't have the bacteria to help digest. So then you'll feel uncomfortable.
Last note on fiber is I'm guessing you're not really recommending go grabbing that box of whatever O's there is today that says blah, blah, blah fiber on it and getting your fiber that way.
No, because a lot of the fiber there might just be the soluble fiber, and a lot of those cereals are sweetened, so you're not just getting the fiber, you're getting a lot of other stuff that maybe you don't want.
Excellent. So let's go from there and let's talk real briefly about sleep, because that seems to be one I like that. I think maybe I'm overly optimistic that we're starting to get over the hump where people like the Army Surgeon General is saying we need our soldiers to sleep. It's no longer a badge of honor to get like 4 hours a night.
No, you're right about that. And I think the goal we're all shooting for is to do better with 4 hours. And that is in 4 hours, let's get 4 hours of good sleep.
Oh, God.
Now we have a problem where people are in bed 7 hours, but they only get 3 hours of sleep because they don't fall asleep and they're grinding their teeth and they're up too late and they start worrying about the news and what they're going to do tomorrow. And next thing you know, it's not quality sleep. I think I'm not an expert, but I think there's some tips maybe for helping people to sleep better. One is try to get a set bedtime because your body works on a rhythm. And if you're, in bed at 10 p.m. one night and 1 a.m. the next night, and then you go to bed at 6 p.m. or get a nap in the evening, you can never get on a schedule. So try to set a bedtime. The other thing that people neglect is getting it real dark in the bedroom. It's hard to get the bedroom as dark as it needs to be, but ideally, when you wake up in the middle of the night and open your eyes, you shouldn't see anything. Most people's bedrooms are not that dark, and that means they open their eyes, the light is going to wake them up a little bit, and that'll be harder to get back to sleep. It turns off melatonin and a lot of these other things. So my advice, if you can't make the bedroom very dark, get a nice pair of those eye shades that is cool so that you can wear them while you sleep and not get overheated. I think that's a good trick.
We do, in the wintertime, we wear extra long hats. You can roll it down over the eyes. In the summertime, we get the Batman.
Okay, great. You got it all.
So, we go completely nuts. We do one that's not on your list, which
Really?
is it came from Patrick McKeown. He's one of the world Buteyko experts. And he recommends his patients to avoid sleep apnea and to help them get more restful night's sleep. And we found it a piece of the hypoallergenic paper tape over your mouth. You build up slowly. You put that over your mouth, and your nasal cavities open up. You nasal breathe through the night so you don't get a sleep apnea of and you get into a deeper night's sleep. And we can feel a difference if we don't wear the tape versus if we do.
Wow, that sounds like that's something for experts only.
It's definitely down the mad scientist path, and we started with long-time nasal breathing during the day because you'll panic yourself if you go put a piece of tape on you're not used to nasal breathing.
Spectacular.
So let's go from there, and let's talk about this one I haven't read in your books, but I bet you have something to say on it, the dangers of sitting.
Well, I think it goes hand in hand with, living in today's world that we're all spending way too much time sitting. We never used to, and we're not really designed for it, of course. More and more people are trying to get more motion in their day, and that means they're having stand-up desks or they have, treadmill desk I've seen. And, it's important to keep in mind. I know if you have certain tools, people can wear the little Apple Watch now, and if you've been sitting too long, it reminds you to get up and move around. Mm-hmm. And it's sad that we need reminders for that, frankly. We should know that we're not supposed to sit on our butts too long, and after a half an hour, you should get up and move around. And, you don't need to go jog. I mean, just get up and, you might walk down the hall or down to lunch or something like that. But we do sit too much. I think that's a biggie.
So let's talk about from there dance and rhythmic movement. You're the first one who I heard said that it's rhythmic movement, and I love it.
There's so many kinds of rhythmic movement. I mean, dance is just one of them. The reason I like the dancing so much is besides the rhythmic movement, it puts a big smile on your face too. But when you think about rhythm, I mean, every culture has their own history of rhythm. Mm-hmm. There's African drums, and every culture has drums, and there's, pretty much anybody that starts a drum beat will get people tapping their feet or eventually, tapping their leg. And, next thing they want to get up and jump up and down. And that's just one thing about hearing a rhythm is you want to move your body. And when that happens, you get a smile on your face and something changes in your brain that, makes you calm and less stressed. And so I think dancing is perhaps one of the best ways to get a good workout. Think about it. A lot of the forms of rhythmic motion that we do have that same effect, whether it's riding a bike, hiking up a mountain, mm-hmm. swimming in the pool, going rowing or kayaking, paddle boarding. These have a calming, rhythmic activity that soothes and calms our mind. That's different than even, let's say, playing tennis where you're just chasing a ball around the court madly, until the point is over and you either won or you lost. I mean, that's stressful, On the other hand, walking or rowing or swimming or paddling, wonderful, restful. And dancing, best of both worlds.
I think the word that just came to mind as you were saying that is flow.
The
Things
flow.
that get you into flow.
The flow. I love the flow.
So
immune system loves it too.
Excellent. I guess I was going to go here. Rodents Recovery and Journal. There was a rodents study that you mentioned in one of your books on rhythmic weight-bearing exercise and how much better they did.
I don't even remember that one. I did some research for that.
happy rodents.
Some happy dancing rodents.
so let's go from happy dancing and smiling faces, and then let's talk about what is vitamin L.
Vitamin L. I always say love, but people told me no, it's love and laughter. I think they're right. There's two vitamin L's. There's L1 and L2. So yeah, love and laughter, and that's because there's two parts of optimal health, and that's health and happiness. And what's interesting is the love and laughter part is necessary. Those are requirements. Those are vitamins that we need. And that's because they're the antidotes for the worrisome emotions that have the opposite effect on our immune system, the fear, the anger, and the despair, the three negative emotions. And so love and laughter, that's your antidote. The more of that we can find, the healthier we are.
So if you've got somebody who's coming down with something or thinks they might be coming down with something, if you can hit them with a double dose of the vitamin L, you can literally help boost the immune system at that point.
You could nip it in the bud, sure.
So go get some fun movies.
Find a friend.
So
do some laughing.
I love it. And if you have a spouse or partner, get them to give you a massage.
If you can. You might have to trade massages.
Hey, that could be an extra dose of vitamin L.
What's good for the gander? You definitely want to trade.
Then you have another one, get a pet.
A pet. I mean, how wonderful is it to have a pet that gives unconditional love? I mean, that's vitamin L in spades.
I
No
love that.
judgment, just love.
The last one I have on vitamin L, I haven't heard of this one before. What is a love journal?
People, everyone happens. I don't care how happy a person you are. There's times when you get hit with something and, you feel sad or upset or, angry. And then it's nice to be able to read through some lovely things that you can remind yourself about. And so anytime somebody has a great experience, I tell them to take notes, put it down in your journal. Nothing bad in there, only the good things. You want to put all the nice things that make you put a smile on your face and remind you of how much people love you and how much you love those people. And then when you feel down, you get your journal out and you read a few entries and you can write a new entry. And what a great journal to have. I'll tell you, there's nothing better than the love journal, going back and reading through that. And you can even share it with, people who need it.
I love that. You can carry it. I love the love journal. You can carry it around with you,
Yeah.
and anytime just crack it open and start reading, and you're going to smile.
You are. I mean, I love, for example, you now have Facebook and all these things. And if you go on Facebook, of course, you always want to read the posts of the people who use Facebook like a love journal.
Mm,
They're just posting about what they love. You want to read that, sure.
I love it. So, so let's talk about soothing, and I wonder if you can dive into Bilbo Baggins' house in Lord of the
Oh,
Rings.
the things you're coming up with. It's so interesting because, the Lord of the Rings, it plays on TV on some channel now almost around the clock. And last night it was The Hobbit. And sure enough, I was tuning in
Hmm.
and there's Bilbo Baggins' house, in The Hobbit. And you couldn't have a more soothing place to be in. I mean, it's under a nice mound of grass, and he's got these beautiful round doors, and there's a fire in the fireplace. And of course, you can just about smell the food that's cooking in the kitchen because it must be lovely. And inside are all the little, lovely knickknacks and things that are special memories for Bilbo. And shouldn't we all have a house like that? I mean, that you just feel calm being in. I'm fortunate because I get to work at this beautiful place here at Canyon Ranch, and it's spectacular. I mean, the artwork and the details and, the views and the food and the smells, the aromas, the beautiful sights and the gorgeous scenery here. And it's just so amazing. And people, pay a lot of money to come and spend a few days here. And then they go home back to the chaos that they ran away from. And that's not the idea. Home should be like this, and that is a soothing environment. You should have soothing lighting and sounds and not too much noise, and you should have, nice photographs or paintings, and it should make you smile, and the color should be soothing. And that's what your immune system loves. And you can do that at home and you can do it at work, because then you've covered the two places where you spend most of your time. And
Beautiful.
so if your home and your work feel like you're at the spa, your immune system is going to be very calm.
I once wrote an article for an ADD journal many years ago that was to turn your home into a Zen zone, and I think this is turning your home into a spa. This is
I like
even
it, the spa zone.
I like it. My wife Jessica, she got sick for a few years, and she's much better now. She's on her way to full recovery. She got sick from indoor mold toxicity that we didn't know was hiding there. I wonder if you could tell us what is indoor air pollution.
Yeah, I mean, mold is bad because it's hidden usually until, and by the time
It
you
was.
see it, it's the tip of the iceberg. It's way, way, way deeper, broader problem than what you see. And that usually requires a bit of effort, to get the problem under control. There's places where mold is rampant. Of course, it'd be in hot, wet climates. So in Florida, they've got a ton because it's, humid and quite warm all the time. And so it depends on the age of the home that you're in, and of course the water that's there and the heat. That's not the only place to get pollution. You can get it from the air quality itself, and we know that people that live in places where the air quality is poor pay a price for that, and that is more inflammation and more stress affecting the immune system. Some simple things, you don't have to move to, get away from that. Just install some air cleaners. And I usually tell people one in the bedroom and one where they work, a nice HEPA filter that'll recirculate the air every hour or two, and you can actually clean out a lot of the particulate matter that is negative, has a negative effect on the immune system. And people forget that the largest absorptive area in the body is not the gut, it's the lung. About 80 square meters in the inflated lung, and that's a huge amount of absorption for the particulate matter in the air. So I recommend these HEPA filters, and it's best to put one in your office and one in your home. So you clean, and the bedroom is probably a good place because you're spending 6-7 hours there every night.
Mm-hmm. Do you use a water filter as well?
You can either use a water filter, which I recommend, or you could also use one of the filtered carafes, which are handy. Instead of having to install something on your sink or under your sink, you can just pour your drinking water through the filter, activated charcoal filter on the carafe. It's not perhaps as effective as something like reverse osmosis, but it also doesn't waste water like RO does. So I think the carafes are fine, and they make for much better drinking water.
Are there anything that you're recommending for people today that you weren't recommending 5 or 10 years ago that you've tripped across and you're like, we need more people to do this?
I think the things that we're seeing more and more of a need for, first of all, helping people with the dose of exercise. Mm-hmm. I think that's important because a lot of people are overdoing it. I think the other thing that we're seeing is understanding the supplement side of things in a much more detailed way. In the past, people were just taking handfuls of things that seemed to have impacts on different conditions, but now we have a better sense for how they're working together, and that there's a more focused, let's say, way to use these supplements for prevention. Mm-hmm. And understanding that I think a lot of the things that we're dealing with are really healing responses of the body that, let's say, some disease processes have hijacked. And that's been the case with the immune system when it deals with cancer and with autoimmune disease. It's a normal healing response of the immune system that these disease processes have hijacked. And that's understanding the immune system better than we did.
Beautiful. Would you say vitamin D is one of your top supplements, particularly as we're coming out of winter, that you'd recommend for people?
It is, because D normally we get from the sun, and in the winter it's not quite so sunny enough, let's say at least in the Northeast, to get the D that we need. Mm-hmm. And there's two ways that you can help yourself. One is with a trip, and I usually like to go down to the islands and go swim around some blue sunny salty water, or taking the vitamin D as a supplement if someone can't get to the sunny climates. And with the sun, of course, that's another Goldilocks situation. You don't want too much or too little, but mm-hmm. just right. And that usually requires maybe 20 minutes of sunshine, a few days a week in a sunny place.
Beautiful. Probiotics versus antibiotics, and then we'll start to wrap things up here.
Yeah, I mean, the probiotics somewhat offset the side effects from antibiotics, perhaps not entirely. Mm-hmm. What we've learned about probiotics is that the little pill or powder or liquid, whatever it might be, it's not a solution. It's more of a starting point. And that is, the probiotic provides a seed of the bacteria that you'd like to grow. But in order to get them to grow, we've got to create the environment that really helps them. And that's the fiber. That's where the two types of fiber really come in. And so the probiotics work best when someone's getting the beans and the berries in their diet that feed the probiotic bacteria. So that's an important thing that we've learned.
And that's one that most people don't hear is you'll take the expensive probiotic, the expensive kefir, or whatever it is, but if you don't have anything to, you've put in the seeds, but you haven't watered the seeds, then it's no good.
Exactly. You've got to give them what they want to grow, and that's the fiber.
Fantastic. A couple wrap-up questions we have for you that we ask all of our guests. And first is, what brings you personally the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm so lucky because, being a physician, I get that feeling on a regular basis. Anytime somebody emails back and says they're feeling better, or the plan has been successful, or now they're making progress, and now they've had success, and, they've, where they struggled before, now it's helping. Or, one of the biggest ones is somebody that I've never even met might have read the book, and they write back and say, since I read the book, I started doing what you suggested, and I've had improvement, or I feel better. That's huge. I mean, that's really a good feeling, to have that kind of feedback. Of course, I'm lucky being in the occupation that I'm in. That happens on a regular basis. It's fun.
Very cool. Very cool. So where can people go to find out more and to find your books and to find out what you're up to?
My job is here at Canyon Ranch. I'm based in their Lenox property. I've written 3 books, and they're all available still on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and your major booksellers, both in stores and online.
Fantastic. And we'll have links to get you over to his books as well at inspirenationshow.com.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for being on the
Thanks,
show.
Mike.
The last question I have is any last words of wisdoms you want to send people off into the world today with?
Remember, health is not just about being physically healthy. You've got to be physically and mentally healthy and happy. And so putting these 2 things together means there's a balance in life, right? And that is we've got to try to find that balance for ourselves.
Beautiful.
I know you're helping your listeners too. It's a great show.
Thank you so much. Thank you. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get your own longevity and get balanced, and shine bright. Woohoo! Hi everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also leave your comments, have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!